galvanized our wheels in terms of realizing the kind of poor conditions that we're dealing with here. The field, obviously, we're going to talk about that first, since that seems to be the most pressing concern. And as we move forward potentially with projects and redevelopment, this would be the first phase to kind of fall as far as it goes, because it's a space that isn't going to be, the fact that no one uses it right now means that nobody's going to miss it when it's being redone. And then when it does eventually come back online, then we will have, approximately almost a 50% increase in usable space. But right now, the problems are myriad. Compaction is obviously an issue, and this is something that's really exacerbated by the fact that you get a field that never dries out, and people will go ahead and use it. If the weather is nice and it's a little bit muddy, people are going to go out there and play on it nonetheless. And when that happens, the compaction is just kind of stacked on top of itself as far as it goes. Because what we're already dealing with potentially is a situation in which you may or may not, we can't be too candid about this, but there may be some functions and some elements beneath this field that are less than savory, and somebody may have really kind of like gone to the efforts to almost like cap the area with maybe a clay layer or something like that. Because what we're seeing too is that there's subsidence and things like that towards the north end of the field, which indicates there may be something down there that may have kind of like even collapsed, thereby creating these issues. And probably the most disturbing trend that we witnessed is that there are a number of sewer drains located at corners of this field, and we're not even certain anymore as to whether or not they're actually connected to anything, or whether or not they've just become so clogged that there's literally been standing water in there for the last couple of days, even when there really hasn't been too much precipitation. So that's something that we really have to figure out, whether it's a matter of having somebody come through to clean those out, or kind of almost doing away with them altogether. But the fact remains that they're really not working right now, and the grading that takes place on the periphery of this area is really doing it no favors either. As we stated before, this field is really taking the brunt of every other surface on the playground, and it is not equipped to deal with that stress. And speaking of, the real culprits here, it's impervious surfaces that are pretty ubiquitous throughout the entire space. Obviously, impermeability is going to create surface runoff that's all going to go over to the field or into the sewer, and without very much to slow it down. So what you're going to see in massive storm events is a real outflow that is something that a lot of our utilities can't really deal with. Particularly having spoken with some of you, particularly those folks who live nearby, who have kind of given us accounts of massive flooding that is in all likelihood a result of some of the activities or lack thereof that are taking place here. Obviously, with the surfaces like this, your blacktop and your darker sort of paving materials, you're going to get the heat absorption and reflection that is going to be particularly crucial and awful in the summertime. Really, it's an amorphous space. Definition of the space and the differentiation and delineation between spaces is not there. So what you get is kind of a Thunderdome atmosphere where just anything goes. And the same thing goes for circulation. You've got this area that kind of, in the absence of the field, serves as the main play area, but it is also a main thoroughfare for commuters, bikers, and so forth. So you consider all of the traffic that's going in so many different directions, it's only reasonable to assume that sooner or later somebody's just going to get creamed. As far as the playground goes, obviously a lot of you expressed your kind of dismay with the surfaces as they exist. We couldn't agree more. The incongruities in the surface create tripping hazards that no playground should have available. I don't know if available is the right word, but it's completely unacceptable to have an uneven surface when kids are running around, because they're not paying attention to the sort of topography beneath their feet, and a fall is very likely under these circumstances. Also, it's a very dark material. I don't know why, of all the colors that could have possibly been chosen, they chose dark, heat-absorptive colors that, in conjunction particularly with the sort of metal and plastic aspects of these apparati, become just scalding, for lack of a better word, and offer really no respite for students or the parents who are watching them as far as it goes. Now, obviously, we've addressed the dinosaur urinal kind of hybrid thing, and obviously the graffiti is also an issue. We've got a circumstance where, if I stand here long enough, in all likelihood, somebody's going to tag me. So, you know, it's not surprising that you get this element. And in fact, I don't think that it's too extreme. I mean, we are in a major city, and kids will be kids. But nonetheless, we want to create something that will deter them from doing so, and whether or not that's an increase or an enhanced level of oversight, or whether it's an issue of creating spaces that are kind of above reproach as far as it goes. I think that's where we're looking at. We've also taken a look at some of the auxiliary spaces. Obviously, you know, as we approach these issues, it's best to take a sort of holistic approach. Obviously, the play lot is only one part of the green spaces that are contained upon this lot. Right now we have the Victoria's Garden, which is in kind of a dilapidated state right now, despite the fact that Green Corps is still taking credit for this. So we took a look at that too, and one of the solutions that we've kind of come up with, we'll talk about later, as to how this space can be used. Because right now, through observation and so forth, it's really not, it's one of the more underutilized but awesome spaces that Goethe has at its discretion. Off-site connections are something that we want to cultivate too. Most of you are aware that Goethe as a green space is one of many that are sort of developing within this area. The Haas Park redevelopment is going to be critical in all likelihood to funding in terms of the Goethe play lot. But also we have an opportunity here because, as many of you may or may not know, there was a field house function at the north end of this property at one point at Goethe, and it has since went into disrepair and then was demolished. And in the absence of those functions, which were primarily after-school based, they employed full-time staff from about 3 to 9 p.m. apparently for helping with homework and so forth. But Haas is apparently developing similar functions and potential amenities and things like that that can help restore those functions. And so what we need to look at, if we're going to have a potential population moving from Goethe over to Haas after school, is we really have to begin to focus upon the corridors that the students are going to be traversing in order to get there. And so this offers a lot of opportunities, not unlike how people develop strategies for creating safe walks to school. This would be a very similar sort of thing. And to cultivate a relationship with the Haas Park staff and to make full use of those facilities so that we don't have to cram everything into one space and we can rely on some of our other public green spaces. In terms of activities, this is just a simple sort of functional diagram. These sort of red lines denote the sort of circulation patterns as they occur, and as you can see, the majority of the circulation is really taking place along Rockwell and just traversing the property itself. And as you can see, this path of, this means of going from one place to another really does disrupt some of the functions that we've witnessed and that you guys have told us about over here. So this really kind of illustrates, this is about as telling an image as you could possibly get for that field. It really defies description, and so we have to give it something a little more cohesive, a little more concrete, and develop that into a usable space, because as many of you expressed, including teachers, this is a space that people are not even allowing their children to access because of the dirt, mud, dust dynamic that seems to have ruined it for everybody and severely restricted the amount of area that the kids have to use. So I'm going to hand it over to Brianna right now, and she's got some stuff about user and that.
Thank you. So these are just a couple of diagrams to show exactly, we broke it down between school users, so students, teachers, parents, and then community users, people, the families and the active adults and the unsupervised youth and commuters and neighbors that all have a say in what happens here. We try to put a couple of quotes on some of the more interesting things that we've heard, and then just really figure out what are the most important things that you're looking for. Safety, outdoor teaching, gardening. Soccer is huge as far as one of the sports that, one of the top sports that you wanted to be able to play here. A seating area, more seating in general, shade, stormwater management, and maintenance. We got a lot of concerns about, fine, we're going to do this great new park, but what's going to happen to a year from now, 2 years from now, down the line, and how is that being addressed, and how can UHC help the school address that? So the community had a lot of similar concerns. Safety was always one of the more prevalent ones. Aesthetics and sound is also another concern that we will address, of course. And everybody else uses it for the same things that the students use it for, as far as soccer and the play equipment, gathering space, and then, of course, the stormwater management is one of the big actual physical things. And this here is just a diagram of the woods. So we tried to show that there is, we would like to address the separation of ages by kind of allocating that to the courtyard, which was a common suggestion and just something that we agree with. And then it looks like we're probably, looking at the idea of keeping the basketball, but adjusting it in a way that it's usable by the students, but it's not necessarily desirable for, pickup games from around the community. So there are ways that we can, design-wise address those issues. And then we, kind of zoned out how we would address all those other things.